This is the Datacolor 2012 webinar series, and we're doing ever more advanced content in this webinar series, and we're getting ever larger numbers of people signing up for it, which is very encouraging to see that photographers and other digital imagers are interested in really advanced stuff, such as this one being on fine art reproduction. Now, either David Saffir or myself could spend an entire day talking about the topic of fine art reproduction and the workflows involved in it. We're both pretty passionate about that. But what we're going to do is David has put a very big slide set together. I think he has 45 slides or more that he's presenting, and I've worked on that set with him. And I'm going to be answering questions, fielding questions through the chat function while he is doing this presentation. Now that works great when we focus on Datacolor products. In this case, we're talking about big, complicated things that may not very well be something I can answer questions on directly in chat. So if you ask me a question and it's a small color management related one, I will answer it. And if it's a big one, I'm just going to put a period or an asterisk in the personal reply, and that will be your cue to know that what you need to do is you need to contact David Saffir at the email address on the last screen of this presentation if you have big questions that you want to talk about, and he will attempt to help you, and if you need actual workflow consulting, he'll be happy to work with you. So that's the lowdown on this. Please organize your screen in such a way that you can see the chat window so that you can capture the information that's flowing through there, as well as hearing David and seeing his presentation. Now, David Saffir is a professional photographer in the LA area. He's done a lot of repro work. He works with Hasselblad, Nikon, various camera types, and has done a great deal of art reproduction, including the images that you'll see here in this presentation. It's an interesting field. He's worked with HP, and they've got some pretty serious repro systems they've been working on the last few years. My experience with this has been more with Epson output devices and with fine art printmaking to canvas and to watercolor papers for original artwork, and the same exact workflows work beautifully for photography once you have them down. So it's often a mix, often word and image or mixed media, artwork, native artwork plus images plus text are a wonderful combination to work with in digital files. So there's no real distinction between the three. Once you get going, it's all art. So I'm going to let David take over after I give you a couple more comments about the webinar, and that is that there will be a couple of polls during the webinar. Please participate so we can get some feedback, and there will be a giveaway at the end. There will also be some excellent discount offers at the end, so stick around and we'll talk about those things at the end. And if you have questions for David Saffir, you can find his email at the end, and of course you can always email Datacolor direct to ask about anything there. So I'm going to let David Saffir take over, and I'm going to man the keyboard for questions and answers as we go. So enjoy the webinar. Thanks.
Okay, this is David Saffir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I can't tell from this screen right now. This is David Saffir. I'm a photographer. I'm located in Southern California, just outside Los Angeles. My business consists of commercial photography, fine art photography, art reproduction, and color management consulting. I also write for several magazines such as Photo Technique and Professional Photographer. What we're going to do is talk today about something that's near and dear to my heart, is fine art reproduction. I got started with this in part because I wanted to own a wide format printer, and the expense of that was a little bit daunting, and I figured out that if I could supplement the cash flow in my business with some fine art reproduction, that I could afford the printer and be making prints for my photographer friends and my artist friends and myself. And that's how that got started. Now we're going to go through, let's get the next page going. We're going to go through some information that is more related to the market. It sets the stage for the rest of our technical discussion, and we're going to be in and out of this sort of context-oriented talking from me throughout the presentation. It's an underserved market. There are quite a few people out there who will say, well, I can do fine art reproduction, et cetera, but the fact is that many of them really don't have the tools or the skill set. So there are plenty of places where a particularly innovative and photographer and someone who's willing to learn can move up pretty quickly. And there's several tiers to this. There's a basic level for example, for local photographers and local artists who simply want to reproduce the artwork and perhaps make some showings at local exhibitions and things like that. And then all the way up to the advanced level of, say, the Getty Museum, who have a nearly unlimited budget and resources and training, and just about everything in between. Technology has been updated in the last couple of years, particularly in the last year, and made it much easier for us to get very consistent results from beginning to end. And the amount of integration that's available, if you look, for example, at the Datacolor Color Management line of products, I think you're going to see that the integration, the handoff from one stage to another has been getting easier and easier. So the workflow has become easier and more effective. Another point about this, and this is both a marketing and in some sense a technical issue, is that this kind of work is excellent for archiving. If you think about it, many painters will create a work and put it on the wall and admire it and enjoy it, and perhaps take it to a few shows, or maybe a juried show, and if it doesn't sell, they put it away. Well, there's only one of that item. In fine art reproduction, if you wish, you can make such a good, almost a duplicate of that piece, that you could consider it to be, exemplary of someone's work at a very high level. And of course, if you're into digital asset management, the digital archiving can also be quite safe and quite a nice way to keep a color-corrected, color-managed, nicely tuned file on hand for printing on demand. So it's really a nice environment for artists right now to have their work reproduced or archived. And it can be a profitable business because one charges for the photography and the image editing and the archiving, and then one charges for the prints, particularly with print on demand. It can actually turn into an annuity business, and that's certainly the case in my area. We're going to move on to the next slide. So our overview, we're going to talk about studio setup. I think studio setup is actually part of color management in this particular case, and we will talk about lighting and capture, processing, printing, and archiving. Some of the examples here you see, of course, is a medium format camera, the SpyderPrint device, getting ready to make a printing profile, the SpyderChecker, and the indispensable tool for fine art reproduction, the light meter. Well, let's do a quick poll. I just wanted to know in amongst this audience how many people are actually involved in fine art reproduction. And our answers are no, or you're considering it, or you do it occasionally, or it's a consistent part of your business. So we're going to take a minute. And if you would kindly answer the poll, I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay, I saw the poll screen come up and then it went away, so I'm not sure where we are. Could either Patty or David give me a status update, please?
Well, what we're seeing on screen is the poll questions still. So
okay.
I think you can move on.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Thank you, David. Now, I wanted to put something in here, a Photoshop tip. This is something that quite a few people here who are quite sophisticated know about this, but there's always a group that, Adobe doesn't exactly publicize the fact that they create a color settings panel when you first install Photoshop that is not photographer friendly. And this is under Edit Color Settings, whether you're on Mac or PC. And you can see some red arrows here. Some of the key areas are going to be your RGB color space. I would recommend either ProPhoto or Adobe 98. Most people are comfortable with Adobe 98. And then under the color management policies, there's really two key areas here. You want to preserve embedded profiles. And I'm saying this because there will be times when someone is going to bring you a file to print if you're doing any printmaking. And you want profile mismatches and missing profiles, etc. The Ask When Opening tick mark will ensure that you get a notification when you load the file that the color space of the file that you're using is not the same as the one that you've set as your default working space. You really want to know what you're getting. You really don't want it to be convert to color space without you knowing. You want to be in the driver's seat. So I strongly encourage you to use these settings. And then the conversion options, Adobe is really the key thing there. In any event, I just wanted to make sure that you knew that this existed and that you can control it. And of course, you can save it. You can see where my mouse cursor is. You can save this, and I simply give it a name like color. And so if for some reason Photoshop locks up, this typically reverts to the defaults, which are CMYK, 4-color press, etc., and no preserve embedded profiles, etc. So instead of having to parse through all of this, you can simply reload your safe settings. Now the studio setup. One of the things that's really important in art reproduction is lighting control. It's even more important than, for example, a photo shoot where you're shooting packaging and you're looking for spot colors and things like that. In art reproduction, you've really got to have your act together. And I put this picture up for a reason, because it shows that most of the things have been done correctly, but there is a flaw. And you really want a black background. You want plenty of room to maneuver with your lights. You want to use a studio stand, and this camera is on a studio stand with an L bracket, so the studio stand is to the left of, is the camera left of the picture, the camera that was used to take this photograph. You want to have lighting that, whether it's strobe or continuous, you want a reasonably high quality level. You want good lighting controls, so you can control the lighting intensity. And you want to be careful with proximity of the lighting to the painting, because some paintings are sensitive to light energy. In fact, some museums and curators have restrictions on the amount of light energy that can be that the painting can be submitted to in a given year. And so you really don't want to put the lighting too close. You don't want to have extremely bright lighting. It's not necessary if you're working off a stand, et cetera, et cetera. You could have a wall mount, which will ensure that your painting is going to be square to the camera. It will help. Or you can use an easel, and that's the thing where there's an issue in this photograph. I was helping these people set up this studio, and I walked in the morning and I saw this easel and I went, what a beautiful piece of furniture, but it's yellow-orange. And there's a problem with that. You really don't want these kinds of colors coming, even a white background, you don't want these kinds of colors coming back into the camera. And so what we did later that day was we dragged this out in the parking lot and we spray painted it black. We ruined it for any other use, but flat black was the color it needed to be. Yellow was not the color it needed to be. What will happen when this is lit and we're taking pictures, for example, if you look at the lip right here, this shelf, this is going to bounce yellow-orange light onto the painting. That's a color management headache that I really don't want to be involved in. I strongly suggest that you shoot tethered to a display that's been calibrated, and we'll get into this a little bit later, what kind of display, but I suggest that you're using a display that is capable of showing you at least Adobe 98 or 90% of Adobe 98. And the prices on those have come down. We'll talk about that a little bit later. You want a clean power supply. Obviously, you want, particularly to the lighting, and particularly if you're using continuous lighting, you want a clean power supply so that everything stays nice and stable and there's no issues in that respect. And you want good environmental controls. Paintings are frequently fragile items. You really don't want to be working in a room, particularly with continuous lighting, where it's 80 or 85 degrees. That's not good for you or your camera or your computers, and of course the painting shouldn't be subjected to those kinds of conditions. And humidity, of course, should be controlled. So you want an air-conditioned, humidity-controlled environment. Now, if you're looking through the camera, here's a little tip for you. There are devices that will help you line up the film plane or the sensor plane of the camera so that it's parallel to the artwork. But if you frame a little bit wider than normal, and of course you're using a nice flat lens, if you look carefully through the viewfinder with a little bit of practice, you can tell that there are issues with the camera. If there are, you can tell when there are issues with the camera being off on any of the axes that it's capable of moving. And so you want to look through there and you want to square the camera to the artwork. You really don't want to have to make what I call an architectural adjustment, which is basically a transform and distort adjustment to the painting in Photoshop. And the reason is that you're stretching and twisting pixels when you do that. And that's not good for the final outcome. It's not good for quality. So you want to, at minimum, square this up in the viewfinder. And if you look around, there's several gadgets that you can get that will actually completely square the camera off. A bubble level on the camera is very helpful. A bubble level on the easel is very helpful. All of those issues are things to consider when you're setting up. Now, you want to set up the lights so they provide even illumination as measured by your handheld light meter. And this is something that people frequently get into trouble with, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it. And in fact, I'm going to go back to a previous slide when I'm done with this part of the discussion. You can see that I have a painting here, and I've drawn a grid on it. And what I normally do is I actually have this light meter. This is the Sekonic 358. It's a light meter that I like quite a bit. It seems to be indestructible and very, very accurate, much more accurate than my in-camera meter. And what I do is I measure the painting left to right, corner to corner, top to bottom, about every 3 to 6 inches. And what I'm looking for is an exposure that's completely flat and even within 1/10 of a stop. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water just a moment. Now, 1/10 of a stop actually can be important. And of course, if you have a dark corner later and you're trying to edit that in Photoshop, you've got a real headache going. So what I do is I measure it left to right, top to bottom, and I have a radio trigger in the meter and a radio trigger on my lights, and so I can go through that relatively quickly. And you also want to make sure, this is perhaps a beginner's trick, but still important, point the meter into the lens of the camera, not into the lights. You want to get an exposure going that has enough intensity to let you set your aperture to between f8 and f11. That's the sweet spot for most lenses. And by the way, speaking of lenses, frequently what I will do is use a short macro lens. So I believe on the Hasselblad it's approximately a 100 millimeter lens. On the Nikon there's a 60. But the reason I like the macro lenses is because they're very flat field. They're very, very little color distortion. And they're relatively inexpensive, the shorter ones are. So I would suggest that you consider that. A wide-angle lens is not appropriate because it's going to either it's going to give you some sort of curvature and distortion in the painting. You want to fill the frame to about 90–95% when you're taking the photo, so you get the maximum file size that you can. And I'm going to back up a little bit here and go back to these lights. The lights in this particular picture are, I believe, made by Northlight. They're, I hope they'll forgive me for saying this, but they're quite expensive. There are a number of alternatives that are not as expensive. If you do decide to invest in this business and you buy, for example, used lights, replace the bulbs. It's as simple as that, because as bulbs age, the color temperature shifts. You don't want them too close to the artwork, and although these are not positioned particularly well, the lighting that you want is going to, if you watch my mouse cursor, you want this light to basically be pointing at the left-hand side of the painting, raking across. Think of it as almost like, not quite, but almost like lighting a background. And this light is pointing at this corner. So if you're doing your metering across the breadth and width of this painting, frequently, if you have a dark corner over here, the fault is not in the light on the left. The fault is in the light on the right. And you'll find that moving this light, rotating on its axis a few degrees, 9 times out of 10 will solve your problem in a corner, top or bottom, etc., etc. Also take note that the lights are much taller than the artwork that we're shooting. And you know, every light has a sweet spot, so there, no matter what the manufacturers say, there is some fall off in the corners of the box for all kinds of reasons that I don't need to get into right now. So you want to have the lights or your soft boxes or whatever you're using be oversized, at least overlap by, say, between 10 and 25% top and bottom, so that you're really getting the sweet spot of the light on the piece of artwork. And that will help you with your luminance, and also because luminance does sometimes affect color in the way some of these paint materials reflect light, it will also be a color management issue. Okay, so we did this slide. Now every camera model handles color differently, and what I strongly suggest is that a gray card will get you a long way towards having a balanced photograph, but at the end of the day, making a profile for your camera is superior to using a gray card. It's a step-by-step process. You want to standardize your lighting. In other words, you don't want to have 3 or 4 different manufacturers' lights. Preferably, they're all the same manufacturer's lights and they have fresh bulbs in them. You want a tripod or a studio stand and proper exposure, and illuminate the SpyderChecker so that there are no reflections, pretty much the same way that you would illuminate a painting. And you want to fill the frame. You don't have to, but it's a good idea. And you want to make a raw capture. And you know, once you have that part of it done, you can continue to use that profile to govern or manage the color in the subsequent shots, you know, in that particular workday. Now, one thing I also want to mention here, which is in some ways a customer relationship issue, but is also a color management issue, is at the very least shoot the first painting with the SpyderChecker in the frame. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that it gives you a chance to validate the color that you're going to be seeing on screen later against the standard of the SpyderChecker. It's also useful in your customer relationships because the artists need to be educated by the provider, the photographer or the printmaker, about how much color is going to translate correctly, when color is going to move in some degree. Keep in mind we're printing with pigments and they are frequently painting with acrylics or other synthetics or oils, and they're not the same animal. So you want to have this reference to show them and say, this is where we started, this is what it looked like, the camera was calibrated, and from here we can customize this or not as you want me to. So there's a tip for you in terms of both color management and customer relationships. Now I'm going to go through a list of specs and some of the considerations about using this. I'll try to make this brief. It really is a highly useful color management tool. It's tripod mountable. One of the things that I like very much about this, it has replaceable patch sheets so that if one gets ruined, and believe me, in the studio, anything can happen, including a spilled cup of coffee, gets torn, there's believe me, anything could happen. And there is also an indicator on the lower left that tells you when they faded and they need to be replaced. So I think that keeps ownership of this particular device much more economical because it's user-friendly and it can be user-maintained. Now, it comes with calibration software, which operates as a standalone. It's compatible with Lightroom, Photoshop, and Hasselblad's Focus. The right side has the patches are near or within the sRGB color space, and the left side has 6 additional skin tone patches, which may not seem particularly relevant, you know, if you're dealing with people who are painting landscapes and still lives, but you know, the portraits and such, they may come in handy. The gray ramps are 10% steps, and we've added 5 and 95% samples. And the software generates robust, tunable custom camera calibration. It really works quite well. Now, one installs the software from the disk, and you capture the image of the SpyderChecker with your camera. You normalize the image in Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw, or Focus, and you open the image in the SpyderChecker app to generate the camera profile. There are some fine-tuning tools available, tuning crops and rendering intent, things like that. And very briefly, one of the things that I do is, if I'm using this in Adobe Camera Raw, if you follow my cursor, there is a dropper here which has a little circle next to it. And what that lets you do is it lets you drop sampler points onto different squares on the SpyderChecker. And you will see a panel on the upper left, which I've enlarged, and this shows you the RGB values for each of these panels. And these are roughly the targets that you're shooting for when you're normalizing this particular image. And you would use the controls over on the right, the exposure controls, et cetera, to achieve these RGB values on these 3 squares on the SpyderChecker. At that point, you would export it as a file, or you can send it straight over to the SpyderChecker software. In Lightroom, you use the white balance selector, and you want to click on the 20% gray patch, and use the black shadow slider to set the black patch to about 4%, and the exposure slider to set white to approximately 90%. Now, you can see here in Lightroom 4 that you can go photo, edit in, and edit in the SpyderChecker app. So very nice integration. You can also export the photo, say, as a high-bit TIFF, and you can drag and drop to import it into the preview area, or you can go File, Open, et cetera, et cetera. Now, once it's in the SpyderChecker, there will be an overlay of squares, and those squares should be more or less, they should be centered in each one of their corresponding areas. And you can drag the corners of the edges to help position these squares as appropriate. You can you use the Save Calibration button. Now, for artwork, colorimetric is probably the place to start. If you're working on photographs and making photographic images, there would be a slightly different path, which I'm not going to get into right now. And you can save these to Lightroom, to ACR, or to Focus, and they become available to you as basic characterizations of your camera that you can apply to images that you capture. Now, one common mistake is to load this in backwards. You really don't want to do that. If you see magenta in the upper right-hand side, you have made some kind of fatal error along the way. In Lightroom, it will appear in your presets here's one that I believe was created by David Tobie a while back. And of course, in Adobe Camera Raw, you can load them. They're exported to the folder of your choice on your computer. You can load them, and then you can apply that preset to the image that you're working on. You can apply it to all of the images in a photo shoot. Now, here's an interesting thing is the reverse of the SpyderChecker holds neutral target patches, and this can be used for a couple of things. You can use this on a routine basis to set the white balance in your camera. There's a really nice benefit to that is that it will improve the JPEG preview that you see on the back of your camera. Can be used for validating display neutrality, etc., and it also can be useful for checking lighting intensity and evenness. It's quite easy to take a photograph of this and pull it into Photoshop and simply measure it with the eyedropper and see if you're getting the same brightness values in the corners and up the middle. So it's helpful, but I don't believe that it's a substitute for doing the metering routine that I showed you earlier. Now let's talk about displays for a minute. There's a lot of new devices being offered to us every day, and they keep changing, and it's a problem. If my recommendation to you at this point, if you're going to get involved in fine art reproduction, you want to be using a display that can give you most of Adobe 98. That's where the printers are going. Some of them are nearly there, although there are some flaws, but some of them are nearly there. Epson's doing a great job. HP's doing a great job with that. On the higher end, the pro level build quality, the displays that have pro level build quality will last for years and years. I suggest the size at 24 inches and up if you can afford it. You want to know that it can be customized to your needs, so you want to get one that has a reasonable number of controls on it. You want to be looking at things like brightness and even color temperature. I'm lucky enough to own an HP Dream Color, and it's got a reasonable set of controls. Not perfect, but a reasonable set of controls. So I can control luminance, I can set the color space of the device, I can do a number of things. The contrast controls are not all that usable though. And some of the brands to consider, you also want to get something that has a decent warranty. 6 months just won't cut it. Looking at ISO, LaCie, NEC, some of the Dell displays. I'm not a super big fan of Apple, although there's plenty of people using them and doing just fine with them. Just my personal point of view. I think that the Apple displays lean more towards the consumer side of things, and the pro level displays are generally coming from different companies. That's just my 2 cents. It's just an opinion. There are some really good reviews. I believe CNET has some reviews of monitors, and there are a couple of other magazines that have reviews of monitors and side-by-side comparisons. And I also urge you to go and look at them in a shop, take an image file with you, or even take a picture of the SpyderChecker and take it with you and see what it looks like on the screen. Even uncalibrated, you will see things between screens that will maybe not shock, but certainly at times surprise you. Now let's talk a little bit about display calibration. This is a must. You need, if you have a recently made monitor, you also probably do need a recently manufactured display calibrator, because as the gamut gets wider, the display calibration device has to be more capable. The Spyder 4 is has a 7-channel sensor, and it covers the color spectrum better than a 3-channel RGB device does. And you need to check that out when you're shopping around for these. You really only need one device. The Spyder 4 will work with wide gamut, LEDs, you name it. It will even, in one of the versions, calibrate your iPad and iPhone. And the Spyder 4 is calibrated to see color the way that you see color. It has an ambient light adaptation. It has added software options, and it's about 25 to 26% more accurate than its predecessor. So one installs the software and connects the Spyder 4 device via the USB port. And this is what some people call a wizard or a next-driven application. And I think that that's a really nice feature because there's a lot going on under the hood. It isn't necessarily stuff that one wants or needs to really get heavily involved with, but it can be useful to know that it's there and that you can set whatever level of customization that you desire. Now on the right, this is just showing you a Spyder 4 in action, and it's reading a color patch. The calibration devices read these color patches and analyze them for accuracy and create an adjustment table, if you will. That's probably not quite the exact technical term, but I like it. And this adjustment is applied to the color in your display every time you boot up your computer. Typically, when you start one of these for the first time, actually these other two choices would be grayed out on the first cycle, but you're going to do a full calibration. You can check at later dates, check the calibration or recalibrate it. And you can see here that there's 3 drop-down menus, and these can be customized, but these are a good starting point. Gamma 22, 6500K, and luminance of 120. Now, people keep asking me, what does 120 mean? It's a little esoteric. 120 is candelas per square meter. It's a measurement of light energy. To be using, and this helps you get a screen-to-print match in terms of, at least in one respect, and certainly, I should say, more than one respect. If it's too bright, let's say it's running hot most of them out of the box, or 250, maybe even more, 300, you're going to get some pretty serious distortions from top to bottom. Your shadow, midtones, and highlights, details, you name it, transitions are going to be distorted. And they're not going to be anywhere near what you're going to get from your printing device. At around 100 to 120, the display is going to give you a pretty good screen-to-print match, provided that the color calibration has also been done. And so that requires a room that is not brightly lit. If you have a window that doesn't have drapes and you're working on your photographs in that room, you're going to suffer. I get headaches from stuff like that. It also affects your color vision. So think cocktail hour, a nicely dimmed room with a lamp in the corner is the way that I work, and I find that really helps me get things done. It improves my productivity. I don't get fatigued as quickly. My color vision stays where it's supposed to be, and the print matches the screen. It's all good. Now, one of the things that's included in the Spyder 4 Elite is the Expert Console. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to mention one feature along the way. I'm going to point out that you have control over the white point, the gamma, black and white luminance. You can turn the ambient light compensation on and off. But the thing that I would suggest that you pay attention to is the gray balance calibration and set it to iterative. Because in the case of working on art reproduction, you really do, that will give you a more extensive set of patches for the device to read. It will give you better subtleties and transitions, and and of course, if you're doing any black and white work in your printing, it will certainly improve that. Now, let's talk about printers for a minute. Printing profiles. Printers have gotten better and better and better, and what I've noticed is that they're more and more consistent. Let's say an Epson 3880. I have one here right now. I have at least 2 friends and colleagues within 10 minutes of me that also have the same device. And the print quality from them is pretty consistent. There are slight differences between them. All these machines are working in different environments. My room isn't the same temperature and humidity as my friend Richard's room or my friend Mel's studio. And so those environmental conditions affect the ink and the paper and how they combine. It's a chemistry problem. And so each printer has its individual footprint as it wears. It's in a different environment. You're changing paper, you're adding new inks. And this is where custom printer profiles really show their stuff, because you can change 2 or 3 of the inks. Let's say you've been printing a lot. When you put those inks in, you have no idea if someone in manufacturing made a slight adjustment to the formulation of the ink. It happens all the time. And so what you want to do is make a fresh profile. Now, some people would say, you can get those profiles from the manufacturer. You can get those profiles from the people who are third-party paper manufacturers. There are people on the internet that make them, but the fact is they're not made for your printer. They're made for someone else's printer, or they're made on 10 different printers and averaged. And what I want to be doing when I'm doing work that requires this degree of accuracy is I want to be using a printer profile that was made for my setup. So that's my 2 cents on this subject. It used to be that the cost of doing this was horrendous. It's really, really reasonable now. And there's some great deals out there, actually. So I strongly urge you to consider this, even if you're not doing it presently. Now, we're going to go through the screens briefly. Of course, on the first screen, I'm just going to go to Profile Your Printer. And one of the things that Datacolor provides that I really appreciate is it gives me an opportunity to personalize these charts that we're going to be printing. So I can put the printer name, the paper, the ink that's used. I can put any information I want in these. This will all be printed on the target. Remember the target we saw back here? All that information is printed on the target. Well, why is that useful? It can be a reference later. In terms of what went into that particular printer profile. When was it made? What were the conditions, etc., etc. Now, the next screen shows you the setup for printing the target. There's 4 different levels. You have the recommended high-quality target, which is 225 patches on 2 sheets. If you want to include the grays, which I recommend and I do, it's 225 patches plus extended grays on 4 sheets. Now, some people will say you need 700 plus patches or you need 1,400 patches, and that debate is probably going to go on forever. As far as I'm concerned, I'm perfectly satisfied with the high-quality target plus the grays. That gets the job done for me. It gives me all the nuance and color and smooth transitions that I could ever want. And so I use that. It's not an onerous task. It probably takes 10 minutes from the time I boot up the computer till the time that I finish scanning the target. That doesn't include drying time, by the way. Some printers, you're going to want to let the targets dry. In the case of the Epson printers, I still try to wait at least a few hours, if not overnight. The HP printers dry, the inks dry. There's an ink formulation that's quite a bit different. An hour will do the job. In fact, I've gotten away with doing it after 20 minutes. So they do vary, and check with the manufacturer to see what they say about outgassing and dry down and color change. Yep, that's it for that slide. Now, when you print these, now I know this is an eye test. I apologize in advance. Keep in mind that we're going to publish this entire presentation on the web within a few days, so you can go back to this and freeze frame it and look at it. The bottom line is that every printer manufacturer has different controls for the printer. Sorry to say, that's the way it is. What you do want to do when you print the target is you want to disable color management. Here's the reason. You want what the printer is going to give you in its pure form. You don't want software, intermediary software from the operating system or from the manufacturer's printer driver messing with the color that's going to be produced on those target patches. You want color management turned off so you get the real deal. And when you scan it, it will be representative of what the printer can really deliver in terms of its performance. It's not got one hand tied behind its back. And if for some reason you print a target and you scan it and you get a bad result, 9 times out of 10 it's because color management was turned on. So I'm not going to sit here and read this to you. You'll probably all fall out of your chairs. But you can come back to this and take a look at it. And if you practice with it a little bit, you'll find it's relatively easy to print this the correct way. So once you've done your profiling, you're going to name it, okay, and you would save it, and then you would read the target. And you can read it freehand, as you see in the picture on the right, but there's a very convenient easel that's provided in the kit. And you simply line this up with the patches, and smoothly and at moderate speed, you just push the button down and you drag it across the patches. And if you've done a good job, you will see indicators on the computer screen, and you also get a very pleasant chime. It's kind of like a reward. It's not as good as a banana, but it's good enough to let you know that you've done a good job on that line. You can proceed to the next. Now, when you're done with your printer profile, one of the things that Datacolor provides is Spyder-proof. And so you can choose a rendering intent, and you can switch back and forth from this, from a proof state, from soft proof. You can turn it on and off, so you can see what your calibration looks like and what it looks like without the calibration. Now, here's another panel that's in the software. I don't want to go down a road of driving you nuts with a wheelbarrow full of detail, but I want to leave you with the idea that there are some pretty serious fine-tuning controls that are included in this package. Very, very, very helpful. For example, you can fine-tune the profile so that when you produce your prints, they will match a display environment. So, for example, this brightness control, you can adjust the brightness of the print to match the viewing environment. You can also fine-tune the color temperature of the print, warm or cool, to match a viewing environment. And one person I know that uses this software actually has made a set of reference prints with a plus or minus version based on this adjustment and a plus or minus version based on this adjustment. And I think they have 4 or 6 of these examples in their briefcase. So they will go to a gallery where an artist is going to be having a show. They'll pull these out and look at them in the light that's going to be used for the exhibition, and they'll say, oh, version number 2 is going to give us the best results. So briefly, succinctly, you're in the driver's seat. You can make adjustments, and you can make several profiles with different sets of adjustments in them to suit your needs for a particular viewing environment or a particular artist, etc., etc. Now, once the profile is created, it becomes a tool, and as we're going to see later on in this presentation, it becomes a tool for both printing and for a color-accurate preview before you print. So let's talk about soft proofing. This is a phrase that's a little bit of a mystery to a lot of people. It's a carryover. Excuse me a moment. I just take a sip of water. It's a carryover from the days when we were using CRTs and we were proofing for 4-color press, and it's sort of carried over in Photoshop and in Lightroom. And I don't think it's really helpful that it has done that, because what it is a color-accurate preview, and it's a color-accurate preview that represents what your print is going to look like when it's produced on a particular machine with a particular paper and ink combination. Okay, so you start off in Photoshop. We'll get to Lightroom in a minute. You go View, Proof Color Custom, and you're going to get a pop-up menu, and it says Device to Simulate. And if you click on that pop-up menu, you're going to see all of the printer profiles that are installed on your computer. Now, all of those profiles can be used on a color-calibrated display to give you a color-accurate preview on screen of what your print is going to look like. Now, that's important for two reasons. The first reason is that you may do this preview and say, I'm heading towards using a paper that's not going to be good for this print. Or you can enable this, and as you are editing the image and you're getting a color-accurate preview every step of the way, you can see what your final product is going to look like. So if your edit goes over the top, you're going to know it before you get too far down the road. Or if it's right on, you're going to know it, and you can keep working. And I find that to be an extremely useful tool and a productivity enhancer. Now there's another tool in here. By the way, I'm using photographs here because I wanted to show you the gamut warning tool, and a lot of the paintings that I have just won't trigger gamut warning. Gamut warning refers to a condition where the display and the software are showing you areas of the image that are not going to print well. They're going to be blocked or clogged up, or they're going to be oversaturated, or their color's going to be distorted. It's because they're just too intense. And since you've enabled proof colors, if you turn on gamut warning, it's going to show you areas, and you can see these in magenta all over this poppy filled image, that are not going to print very well. Now, this is at probably 50 or 60%. If I saw 10%, I probably wouldn't care very much, or 5%. But at 50 or 60%, I would probably go back to some of my adjustment tools, levels, curves, hue saturation, color balance, and adjust the image so that most or all of this gamut warning goes away. Or I would change papers. In Lightroom, you can use the Command or Control S command to turn on soft proofing. This is Lightroom 4, by the way. I forgot to mention that. I was not a big fan of Lightroom up until the point where they put soft proofing in, because I don't like flying blind when I'm doing image editing. So soft proofing is enabled. You can also, well, soft proofing is enabled. You can also do it by checking that box. And you will see this notification, soft proofing, in the upper right, and it will say proof preview. And there's more to it than this in Lightroom. You can do side-by-side comparisons, etc., etc. But get the basic idea. Lightroom 4 is worth having if you're a Lightroom fan, simply because, if for no other reason, then you can do color-accurate soft proofing. And so you would pick the profile, but it's right here. It's not in a drop-down menu, and it says sRGB. There's every profile in the computer is available under this drop-down. You can set your rendering intent, okay? And of course, we have gamut warning, and the way you enable gamut warning in this particular application is there are toggles at the top right and the top left of the histogram, and so you can toggle those on and off and see where you are out of limits on your image. And of course, then you have some greatly improved tools in Lightroom 4 that allow you to make changes that will diminish the amount of orange or magenta areas that you're seeing that are out of gamut. Now, briefly, we're going to talk about printing with a profile. The default for Photoshop is under color handling. It's going to say printer manages colors, and that means that you cannot use, if it says printer managed colors, you cannot use the printer profiles. It's going to refer all the color management issues to the printer. Now, it'll look okay. It's certainly not good enough for fine art reproduction, because the brain in the printer is the size of a pea. It doesn't have all those advantages of having lots of computing power, better software running as they do on your desktop or laptop, and of course, it doesn't have the paper profile, which is customized to that working environment. So I strongly suggest that if you're not doing it, start to work with color handling where the application managed color area is enabled, and you're using the printer profile. This is, by the way, this is from CS6. So CS5 has 3 panels left to right, and CS6 has 2. And you also notice down here at the bottom, there's a thing that says match print colors. So this is also a soft proofing tool. It's your last chance to look at this before you click print and send it over and burn a piece of paper. I don't recommend that you use the show paper white. Some people say with certain fine art papers that it's useful, but I find, although that it's been improved, that it still doesn't really serve the purpose. It doesn't. It's a carryover from 4-color press. It's been improved, but I don't use it. Now, when you go to print, you want to make sure that with some printers, particularly machines that are a little bit older, it's possible to use that application managed color and still leave printer color management enabled. And so you need to explore the dialogues, and this is particularly true for Epson. HP in the most recent machines has made it impossible for us to do that through the printer driver. But if you make a print that looks wildly out of whack, chances are somewhere along the way you're double color managing, and you want to go back and dig through these menus and turn it off. And you really only want to see down here, lower right, color management. You want to see the profile here, and you want to have color management turned off in the printer dialog. I was going to say something else about this. Oh yes, although it's not related to color management, sharpening is an issue. There's been a lot written by people like Jeff Shuey about sharpening images. Clearly, paintings don't need as much sharpening as, say, a landscape or a still life. But you do want to be judicious about your sharpening. Now, in the most recent versions of either Photoshop, Lightroom, or both, it is possible that you could see a more accurate view of sharpening at a greater or lesser magnification than 100%. I'm a little bit skeptical of that. Looking at actual pixels at 100% still seems to give me the best view. And a little tip for you, there is a general rule of thumb that whatever sharpening you see on the screen, you will see less in the print, particularly if you're using a matte or a fine art paper. This is the place where I do sometimes make more than one proof print because, you know, sharpening on screen is a little bit dodgy. So keep that in mind, and it's probably better to be a little bit aggressive, actually, which is the opposite of what most people tell you. If you see a little bit of artifact on screen, you're probably sharpening enough for that particular print. Now, there's some considerations in terms of when you do your sharpening, capture sharpening versus output sharpening, sharpening to a particular size of print, but that's not what we're here to do today. Now I'm going to go through some tips and do some wrap-up work here. We're progressing pretty well. I want to talk a little bit about the business of this and setting expectations. It's a demanding specialty. When you take a piece of artwork from somebody, it's like their child. They've put their heart and soul into it. And so they are very interested in what's going to happen to it, what it's going to look like when you're done. Are they going to look good when you're done? All of that stuff. And by the way, and I'll throw this in right now, one of the things that I do with a lot of these people is I go to them. I shoot at their home or studio. And the reason is that there are many, many artists out there, local artists, advanced amateurs to semi-pros, who have a whole body of work and they've never heard of art reproduction at a reasonable cost, reasonable effort, and all of a sudden they discover you. And they've got 15 paintings in the closet and another 10 hanging on the walls of their relatives' houses. And I don't want to be in a position where I have to load all of those in my car and be responsible for transporting them all the way back to my studio and then back to theirs. So I would rather bring my equipment to them and shoot on site. It's a little bit harder, Takes a little bit more preparation, but in terms of exposure to damage and things like that, it's much less risk. So it's something to think about. Now, if you have an established studio and you're in a position where you're in a big metro area and there's a number of artists in close relation to your geography, I don't know how to say this, but if they're not that far away and they can bring them to you, then you can make them bring them to you. So God bless you. You want to set expectations in terms of color and density. Remember that they're creating something that's really a different animal than what you're going to create. You're working with the pigment-based printer. They could be working with anything, including a mixture of media and materials. And so it's possible to get a very close color match. I don't think it's possible to get a perfect color match for every color that's in every painting. Sometimes you can get it at 100% for one painting and 90% for another. It depends on what they've done. It depends on whether they're using materials that have brighteners and fluorescent materials in them, that kind of thing. There's all kinds of little headaches in terms of getting spot colors correct in this business. And so you have to set expectations. You can say right up front, I can get this close, but in certain cases it's going to be a 95% or 90%. And you need to understand that before you start. And that's one of the reasons I also shoot the color checker panel in one of the frames. Now, if you're dealing with someone who's a curator or an archivist, then you're going to spend more time and they're going to pay you more money to really work on this in Photoshop. And in some cases, you'll work on it in Photoshop and work on small areas of the painting to bring them into line. You'll be working with the painting right next to you under a color-balanced, color-accurate light, and you're working on your monitor, and you're matching them up. And like I said before, there's different tiers. You have to match the camera and the printer to client needs. So that's another thing. There's plenty of people listening to this webinar who have a high-end DSLR, and that will do a pretty darned good job, if not an excellent job, on a lot of paintings. You're not working for the Getty, you're working for, say, a local artist, an amateur, or a semi-professional artist. They want to show their work in juried exhibitions, or they want to go to a show and sell some reproductions of their work. In many cases, those artists are actually going to ask you to alter the color in the final print and bump up the contrast and the saturation in all or part of the reproduction. It's kind of surprising. Watercolorists are are the ones who very frequently will ask me to do that. Now, if you really are trying to get, I sidetracked for a second there, if you're really trying to get super accurate color, then you're going to want to be shooting with a camera that's capable of delivering 16-bit output. You're looking at, say, a medium format camera with a pretty high-end digital back. And that happens to be what I use. I have a Hasselblad H-series camera and a Phase 1 back. And you're going to be wanting to shoot tethered and to a desktop or laptop that's color calibrated, that has a good screen. You're going to really be on top of color management with this, because the customers that you're going to be using this for are going to be galleries. They're going to be people who are curators and collectors, and they want not necessarily the next step in the evolution of a piece of art. They want something that's spot on, almost impossible to tell from the original. In terms of print on demand, we're really in a good position nowadays, because it used to be that if you went to a printmaker, the printmaker would say you have to make 50. And the photography and the scanning are going to cost you $1 gazillion. The poor artists, maybe not poor, but unfortunate artists, is suddenly looking at a bill for $5,000 or $10,000, and they're going to have an inventory of prints. Well, a lot of the artists that I work for, I make 2 prints for them, one for them to keep and one for them to show. So if they show it and they sell, then they can take the one out of storage and give it to the customer and have another print made. And the printing devices with all the color management tools that we have at our disposal are going to make prints that are very, very consistent. So there have been plenty of times where I've taken a print out of the file and made another print, and if I shuffle them on the table, nobody can tell which one came first. So you've got print on demand at a very, very high level of consistency, keeps the cost down, and it also creates what I call an annuity or repeat business for you as a photographer or a printmaker. That's very, very nice. It really helps smooth out cash flow in the business. As far as marketing goes, I don't spend a lot of time on postcards and even the website. It's all it seems to be all customer referrals. It's like I said before, you're taking pictures of their children almost, and so the customer referrals become just absolutely critical to the success of your business. So ask them to refer you to their friends if they like your work. Archiving and storage. You're going to want to make at least a small version of this print. Some people call it a BAT. In French, I can't even pronounce it, as a reference print. I strongly recommend that you do that so that if you get a phone call, can you make me a print tonight? If you have some chance in your schedule of doing that, that you have something to match it to. And of course, storage. We all know about the issues of storing prints. But there's also a very nice side benefit, which is once this is digitized, you can store a digital copy off-site, say in a safe deposit box. And if something happens to the original, at least you have that color-corrected, fine-tuned image that you can make a print from for that artist. And so it's not a total loss. On the printer side, I strongly urge you to get pigment-based printers, pro level. For me, that starts at a carriage width of, say, 17 inches. The Epson 3880 is a good example. There are good, if you're going to want to be printing on canvas, then you probably want to go to a 24-inch printer so you can have a canvas border to wrap around your stretcher bars. A lot of people forget that. They buy a 3880 and then they're shut out of making canvas prints. If you're going to make canvas prints at a normal size, say 16 by 20, you probably need a 24-inch carriage to get the job done. And we already talked about the cameras, so I'll pass by that one. One other thing in terms of wrap-ups is a certificate of authenticity, and this one is really elaborate. I did this as an example for a class of mine, but what this does is the printmaker provides this, and it describes several important things. I'm just going to touch on a few of them to give you an idea of what this does. This is basically I guess you would call it a proof of where it came from. It's the provenance of the print and the art, that it came from the original artist, that it was made by a reputable printmaker, what kind of material it was made on, when it was made, and how many prints are in a particular edition, signed or unsigned. So those are some of the basics. I probably left one or two things out. But the certificate of authenticity is something that can be very important to you as a selling point. It adds value to the print. Okay, so if you go to a lot of galleries, there will be a certificate of authenticity provided along with the print. So if you decide to sell at a later date or it's inherited by a family member, it continues to retain its value. It's just not a print that came out of nowhere. Here's a few examples of resources and references. One of the books, there's an update, Adobe Photoshop CS6 by Martin Evening, one of my favorite authors. The Business and Legal Forums, or the Legal Guide for the Visual Artist. If you're in the business of making, fine art reproduction, I suggest that you get one or both of those books. Of course, I wrote a book a few years back called Mastering Digital Color. It's a little bit out of date, but there's a lot of good information in there. And of course, Mastering Digital Printing by Harold Johnson is also a little bit out of date, but is just an encyclopedia on the subject. I put a book title in here called Succeeding in Print Competition. Now, if you wind up doing art reproduction, you may wind up making prints for other photographers for print competition. did I just say that? For art reproduction or print competition. But some of the things that Patrick points out in his book in terms of managing print quality and repeatability and presentation and things like that are invaluable in this kind of business. And I urge you to consider getting that book. It's not that easy to get, but it's worth the effort. I believe that WPPI sells it on their website. That's probably, and that information is probably a year old. So, but do look around, look for it on the internet if you're interested in this sort of thing. Well, we're going to finish about 2 minutes early here. We have a drawing for a Spyder 4, and the winner's name is Eric Koski. Eric, please forgive me if I mispronounced your name. And we are announcing a 20% off on Spyder products and free standard shipping when you purchase from SpyderDatacolor.com through September 19th, and the promo code is FineArt20. Now, first I want to thank you all for attending. I appreciate the patience that you've shown by staying with us. I can see by the numbers that nobody dropped out during the presentation, which is kind of amazing, in spite of the magnetic influence of the iPhone 5 launch. And I also want to express my appreciation to Datacolor for sponsoring this webinar, and also David Tobie, who's always supportive and always somebody that I know I can depend on to help me get the details exactly where they need to be. Now, one of the things I'll mention is that if you have questions about any aspect of doing this, within reason, if you send me an email, dsaffir@mac.com, I'll do my best to answer it. If I don't answer you within 24 to 36 hours, please do send me the email again. I get a lot of email. I might have missed it, and so don't be afraid to resend it. Web addresses, they're right here on the screen, davidsaffir.wordpress.com. There's a lot of articles on there about different aspects of photography and color management and printmaking. David Tobie from Datacolor also has a blog, real high-end, very, very helpful technical articles and other material, cdtobie.wordpress.com. And his web address is cdtobie.com. So I believe we're done for the day. Thank you very much. We have other webinars coming later in the year. Please do watch for those, everything from the basics to very advanced. Again, thanks to Datacolor for their sponsorship, and have a great day.